And I'd say by the end of October, we're probably going to see a deterioration in the stock market that's going to be alarming.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I got to chat with David Morgan from themorganreport.com. In this interview, I asked him to give us his real thoughts on Bitcoin. I ask, why is silver below $20? And we talk about where we think the US dollar could be heading in this global macro environment. I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to watch this interview. I think that there are some great thoughts for regular people just trying to figure out how to navigate this macro environment that's basically been absolute insanity ever since COVID started. Guys, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so we keep making more of this content for you all. David, thanks so much for joining us today.
Steve, it's good to be back. Thanks.
So, David, I've been following you on Twitter, watching some of your recent interviews, and I got to ask you, let's pretend here that it's not you and I on Zoom. This isn't being recorded. We're just sitting around having a couple of Bud Lights. I don't know what your preferred beverage is. But I ask you, David, give me your real thoughts on Bitcoin. What do you really think about Bitcoin?
Well, I've never been that taken by it. When I did my first article, and about my 2 bits about Bitcoin, a lot of people trust me as they should. I'm human. I make mistakes. Sometimes I, have to correct and continue. Correct an error or modify a thought or whatever. But I've never had a good sense. And what happened was some of the people that helped me research discovered that it was possibly out of the NSA. And when I wrote that first public article, I think it was in 2017, I said I was a little leery of it, that perhaps if it gets real traction, the governments will come in and regulate it. But further than that, Richard Grove was one of my contact points when I wrote the article, and he said that it was connected to, I'll call it the deep state. That one was exactly. So from that perspective, I had a little bit different, let's say, spin than others. But as far as I'm concerned, there's 2 things. One, the concept, I love it. I love the idea. Decentralize, get the banks off our back, be our own bank, be anonymous, peer-to-peer. I mean, all those fit with my ideology of what I've always envisioned for a better monetary system for everybody on the planet. However, it hasn't lived up to that. And the more that it's gone on, I've become more and more disgusted with it's being promoted that way when the facts have changed. Basically, right now, if you've looked at my crypto conspiracy series, Steve, it's been basically hijacked by people that run MasterCard. Some of the Bitcoin maximalists were my friends, and I haven't talked to them in a while. Maybe they don't want to talk to me, and that's okay. Friendship's more important than any amount of money as far as I am concerned. But I think some of these people either learned that things had changed, but were not willing to go straight out to the public with the truth. And it's hard to do. People don't like to admit they're wrong. I know I don't, but I do it. And I think that at the end of the day, Bitcoin did 2 things. It awakened the possibility that we can have a decentralized monetary system. And 2, that there's got to be something better than it that comes to the fore. And I believe that will. So I think it's going to go down in history as being an idea generated that is absolutely profound, but it in itself, I think, failed. I mean, one thing I'll say further, and this is, we're having 2 beers. The one thing that I'm pretty certain about is as good or as bad as it is, objectivity aside, the political class is really big on this climate change and global warming, or climate change, I should say, and carbon footprints. And they have a big case against Bitcoin because it uses energy. I know the counter argument, I've studied it, but that's not the political way of looking at it. The political way is we got to get rid of it. It uses too much energy. So it's not going away, but I don't think it's going to be the front runner going forward, really.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And even Charlie Munger made comments at the recent Berkshire annual shareholder meeting that China is making the U.S. look foolish on Bitcoin. speaking specifically to the fact that we have this, currency asset class, borderline tech stock, whatever you want to classify it as, that's consuming all this energy at a time when global temperatures are rising. The whole thing to me seems kind of absurd that we still allow it to exist. That's just two of us having beers. And,
Yeah.
a year ago, if we would have made these comments on the internet, our Twitter feeds or our comment sections would have just blown up with all this anger,
Right.
and just like almost like requests for violence and threats on
Yeah,
us
right.
for saying these things. I notice, I don't know if I just blocked them all or they all blocked me, but there seems to be a heck of a lot less of that right now than there was when Bitcoin had ran to 60,000.
Right. I don't know anybody's worldview, and we're all entitled to our own, but several, if you're looking on the esoteric side from a Nostradamus, or you're looking on a biblical side, really doesn't matter. The end effect is that knowledge will increase in the latter days. And I think we're seeing that, Steve. So my take, and I hope I'm right, but it doesn't really matter, is that people are more open now about information that contradicts their original premise. I mean, the great Ayn Rand that wrote Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and many others, she's very intellectual. I think she influenced me to a fairly large degree, but she always said, check your premises. And I like to do that. Come back, what's my basic tenet here about Bitcoin, and we already went through that. The last thing I'll say, and I kind of stole it from my friend Peter Spina about, gold, or Bitcoin is gold 2.0. I really dislike any reference to gold. So his reference is Bitcoin is 0 karat gold. I thought that was a pretty good way to to relate it to the gold market.
Yeah, it's kind of just got me thinking. There was a Frank Giustra op-ed in the Toronto Star today, where he was talking about how he thinks that the global monetary order is changing, and specifically discussing China and how much gold they actually might have. Do you have any sense, or have you done any research into just how much gold China might have?
Yeah, I wouldn't say as much as anybody, but I'm right up there in the top 10%. First of all, the way they report, people don't understand. So it's like asking JP Morgan, how much gold do you have in the vault that's in downtown New York City at the tip of Manhattan? And the answer is, we've got this much gold. They don't ask the right question. So when China reports their gold holdings, they're reporting basically a specific arena or vault, or vaults, if you will. They're not reporting their total. So that's a given. As far as what is their total, no one knows, but there's been some pretty good scholars that have gone in and taken a pretty hard look. We know what the flows have been. We have a pretty good idea how much they mine. We know none of it really gets exported. So it's substantially more than what's out there for public display. And, the tie to the yuan has been out there for years. I mean, I know it's more than 15 years. And that's just been an idea that at some point there would be a tie to gold with the yuan. And whether or not that comes to the fore remains to be determined. But it's interesting that we're seeing gold get pretty well hammered in terms of US dollars. I mean, if you're looking at it in terms of other currency, gold is definitely doing this job. In some currencies, it's making new highs. But regardless, in the US terms, it's not doing that well. And if there is a complete financial collapse or close to it, or let's just say collapse, let's say degradation, I'll use a fancy word, and a new button is pushed, and there's a new reset system, which is obviously in the works now. Will it or will it not be tied to gold? And that, again, we don't know, but it is like the trump card, the ace in the hole, the stalwart that no matter what goes wrong. And that's why central banks own gold. They're not necessarily gold bugs, but they know in the worst case scenario, if nothing else works and everything else fails, they can play the gold card. And China got a lot of gold cards. I'll say one more thing, Steve. I know I'm being a little long-winded, but I think it's important. If you trace the history of the power on the planet, it's whoever has the most gold. If you go back a couple hundred years, you'll see, the sun never shone or never set on the British Empire. British had most of the gold, and it was Britain centric before the war, but definitely after the war, World War II, everything shifted to America, and America had most of the gold. If we're right on what we just discussed, and China has most of the gold, it stands to reason that China will be the next up and comer. I know there's a lot of people, China's not going to make it, they're going to have this and that. And they've certainly got problems like everyone else. They've overbuilt, there's ghost cities, they don't have enough energy internal and all that stuff. I know that. I study it fairly hard, but they're not going away. And, when you have real money and you're not accepting some, person's promise to pay, i.e. the US dollar, which will happen at some point, you might be able to buy your way out of some situations, believe it or not.
So look, I know that I'm about to ask you to tell me exactly how the world's going to play out here, but the CPI is pretty hot. It's obviously a big issue for Biden. Do you think that at the next rate hike, I believe is at the end of this month, let's just say we get a CPI print that comes in anywhere near the last one, you think that the U.S. would do another, or the Fed would do another 75 basis points, considering that everything that's happening right now with the U.S. dollar and just how overall strong it is?
Personally, I don't think so. I think what they're going to do in the end of July is to do a pause. They're just going to put out a statement that we're not raising and we're not lowering. We're just going to go on pause and not leave it unchanged, and then see what the market reaction is. My take is the market reaction will be very positive for the stock market, but it'll be short-lived. I mean, there's no way out of this. We're in a corner and we can't get out of it. Where it manifests is really, it's manifesting right now, obviously, all over the globe. In every aspect you want to talk about: food production, transportation, communication, energy costs, political strife. I mean, it's all there. So yeah, they can play their game and pretend that they're going to wait and see more data. We're going to pause here, see more data, and make a determination going forward. At some point, people give up on the dollar and they don't trust it anymore. So it's all based on trust and somewhat on interest rates. I mean, if you're getting next to nothing in Japan, you're getting a whopping, under 3% on the 10-year in the U.S. currently as we're speaking. That's a big spread, and it's a currency that's increasing against the yen. So obviously there's a lot of momentum into the US dollar, even as things deteriorate. This goes right along with, what I propose, or should I say, what I have discovered years ago with the extra pyramid, which we don't need to talk about, but basically as the liquidity dries up, people go to what they trust the most. That's a piece of paper in their pocket. Most people don't know how the stock market works. They don't know anything about the bond market. All they know is they're paying more for food and energy, and they trust a dollar in their hand rather than in the bank. And that's the last phase before the currency burns up. And as the currency burns up, then the smart money, and then eventually the public will do a run to gold, because they'll have that currency in their hand. They realize it's losing so much value so quickly that they must make a purchase of some kind before it's not able to purchase whatever product they're looking at. And that's the crack up boom. And that, I think, will happen from internal, but primarily external. All of the US dollars that we have printed and sent overseas, and people have taken as an IOU, when they find out they're getting close to an IOU nothing, as that perception takes hold, that money is going to flood back into the country, and they'll buy whatever they can with
it. It's so confusing though, right? Because we've printed so many, or the Fed has printed so many US dollars, but here the US dollar has, so much strength. If we look at the euro or the yen, I saw Luke Groman make a post yesterday that I thought was interesting, where he looked at various scenarios of how the global macro environment is going to play out. And the scenario that I think makes the most amount of sense is that at some point, as we head down this path, we're probably going to see the Federal Reserve do effectively a round of quantitative easing just to buy up European and Japanese sovereign bonds, just to prevent them from collapsing. You think that that's a likely scenario?
Yeah, I do. I think that once you get to, as the late great Richard Russell says, print or die, the central bank of central banks is really the BIS, but we'll use the Fed. It's pretty close. We'll do as you just outlined, Steve. They'll keep the system going as long as can. What they're really doing is prolonging the pain and making it worse. But they don't see it that way. They see it as they're rescuing the system or they're keeping it viable. It's impossible. Everybody's insolvent. And so all inflation's in deflation. There'll be a time where, you know, perhaps the currency will be worth more. But until we get to that point, and I'm not saying that's guaranteed, all I'm saying is the whole system readjusts to reality. So let's think of it in this terms. Let's think of all the credit that's out there in terms of what's, we used to be called M3, which they quit publishing years ago, and look at M2. So if you've got, X amount of currency that's in your checkbooks and your savings accounts, and then you've got 5X that we owe on credit. Well, if everything collapses, it'd be like that 1X trying to pay off 5X. So you come down by 80, 90% on almost everything. Of course, the market will determine what's still valuable and what isn't. So let's do it more on a micro scale. People really get it. So you borrowed $20,000 from your in-laws and you've lost your job and all you've got in the bank is 5. Well, you're paying them 25% of what you owe them, but that's all you've got. And they accept it because they know that's all you've got. That's kind of the scenario. That's very much to the not a real broad thinking way to do it, but it's a very simple way. And I like to keep things simple and elegant. So you get the basic idea. We've got so much cash, but we owe this much, and they don't match by a large factor. So what happens in the deflationary scenario after the currency is not trusted is you got to make that adjustment. So, those cars or whatever could come down in price relative to the aftermath. And we're getting there, Steve. I really think we'll see problem. We'll always see problems. I think we're going to see enough of a dislocation in the food supply in America that even the most sleepy American will be awake, seeing that, not empty shelves, but less than they used to be, less choices, less brand names, more businesses, and then high unemployment and all the things we're already witnessing, except it'll be so obvious that no one can ignore it.
It's hard to imagine. I've lived in Canada my whole life. You see what's happening in countries around the world where, like Sri Lanka, where we're just seeing riots, and it's when people are hungry that they tend to get really pissed off and go and blow up buildings. It's hard to imagine those things happening, but it does appear that we're kind of sort of coming to that end game of this fiat system. So we got you here. You're our silver guy. Why silver under $20 right now?
Unbelievable. I don't have a good reason. I mean, the price of the market's determined in a derivatives market. I mean, the price of silver and gold, wheat and corn for that matter, are derived from a market that's basically a paper market for commodities in general. And so that's the price. So if you really want the physical metal on the retail side, you're going to pay huge premiums to get it. And even on the wholesale side, there's a tag on even commercial bars that I haven't checked it lately, but let's say $1 an ounce, which is astronomical. Usually on a commercial bar, it's like a nickel because there is some paperwork involved. You've got to pick it up and you've got to transport it somewhere. But regardless, it's a gift. It's discouraging. It's frustrating, but I don't think it's going to last a lot longer. I do expect we could see lower prices. My premium members that I interface with pretty directly with today's technology asked, what's the worst case scenario? And months ago, I said 18 is probably the worst. And in my most recent published work, which was just about a week ago, I said I fully expect to see a spike low in the metals markets. But if my idea is correct, we talked about a moment ago, Steve, where the Fed pauses and the stock market rockets up for probably one last time. The metals will get hurt, and that might be like that spike low, and that might be the time to buy if you're trying to time it. Once that's, if I'm even correct, takes place, regardless, we're going to get to October. And I'd say by the end of October, we're probably going to see a deterioration in the stock market that's going to be alarming. And that will mitigate action, which means some of that money will move into the precious metals. And there's a direct correlation between the amount of fear in the market, the amount of gold purchases. So I'm not trying to be a doomer or gloomer. I'm just, look, I studied this thing my whole life. I'm a proponent of honesty. If you say, well, you're a hard money guy. Yeah, I am. Because you can't trust people and you can't trust the banks, but you can trust an ounce of gold. But it's more the idea of honesty, integrity, and honest weights and measures for everyone, rather than for the elite elect that gets to print the money ahead of us, where it trickles down to the useless eaters. I'm just sick of the whole system, and I really want to write it, but there's really not an easy way. And we're going to have to go through pain that we probably never experienced, especially in the United States, since the 1930s. And if you read The Fourth Turning, I'm digressing a bit, but that kind of outlines these cycles repeat over and over. It's just that this cycle, this time, is something that doesn't happen for every few hundred years, which means it's going to be planet-wide for the most part. And there'll be opportunities. I mean, let's not forget that during the Great Depression, several businesses were started that are still here today, because the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention. And when you need to be more frugal, reuse something, fix it, get it to last longer, substitution, or all that, that will come. I still don't give up on the human spirit. It's just we're getting a spiritual exercise that we didn't plan on, because nature's giving it to us. And what is that? Live within your means and appreciate what you have. Two things that most Americans haven't done.
So it sounds like you're saying that if we get the pause here and you're still holding on to some cash burning tech stocks, this might be your window where you get some liquidity and you get an opportunity to get out prior to we sort of see that kind of meltdown afterwards.
Yeah, some of the better analysts that I follow, I mean, they're both predicting, well, Michael Burry, for example, 50% decline. I think he's right. I mean, I don't like to say it, but the market is very overvalued. And markets go from overvalued to fair value to undervalued. So there may be a day when stocks are really cheap and really good to buy. But that's not now. I mean, I'd be a net seller outside of the resource sector. And the resource sector has been so beaten up, you could buy almost anything at this point and expect to see something positive within the next 2 or 3 years. In fact, probably extremely good. But, I don't know the future. What I do know is that fear will drive the market at some point, and that's good for the precious metals. It's not necessarily good for the average person unless they pay attention to what Steve has to say, or not necessarily me. I want to keep my ego out of it. But the truth of the matter, that's your money of last resort. And people understood what Mike Maloney's taught for years, the difference between money and currency, or the difference between money and credit. A lot more Americans and, citizens of the world would be in tune with why they need to put their savings in something real rather than in a bank account.
You think that it was a big moment when the U.S. Sort of seized all those Russian foreign reserves, that was sort of the moment for precious metals where you kind of realize that you don't really want that counterparty risk of a currency, but you actually want that precious metal?
Absolutely. And thanks for pointing that out. I really do think that the run to gold has started, but as I've said in other interviews, the run to gold starts with a walk. I mean, no one really perceives it. And then it gets to be a brisk walk, and then a jog, and then a soft run, and then a hard run, and then an all-out sprint when everyone's going for the finish line and everyone's, jumping on top of each other to buy that last ounce of gold. I'm just making an analogy, but you get the idea. So the big money is starting to move in there. If you look at what's happened on the COMEX for gold deliveries, you look at what's happened on the COMEX for silver deliveries, even though the derivatives price has held it down, what better for the banks, or let's say the big boys or big players, to do than to use the derivative market to pin the price wherever they want? Someone will pay a premium above that derivative price for the actual metal and take it. I mean, these people that run the system are not stupid. They know its days are numbered. They just want to remain in control, and they want more control than ever. And you know that, Steve, all of our listeners know. I mean, they're looking for a central bank digital currency where everything is traced, tracked, and taxed. There will be no income tax. There will just be your tax at the point of sale. And you'll be taxed for basically what you buy. And then if it's got a big carbon footprint with it, you'll be taxed an additional fee. And the AI, the system itself, will basically run your life. And this is absolutely hard for me to even accept that they have that idea, but they do. And that's what they're shooting.
Yeah, well, I wish that this was a more upbeat conversation about the world.
Well, let me give you some upbeat. Number one, this New World Order globalism thing probably won't work. And here's why. As we start to tighten up on the resources and there is a contraction in the actual economic activity, the amount of food grown, the amount of people working, the amount of necessities that are produced, semiconductor, it will become more and more nationalistic, which means you're going to go and protect your tribe. So you've already seen this, Steve, in certain areas that say, we're not exporting any more wheat. We want it for our country, for our people. And that's the opposite of globalism. So even though these big elites that do their deal in Davos or the WEF, same thing, want this thing, and so many believe that, they're going to get it their way. I disagree. I think you're going to see a lot of pushback because people inherently have a survival instinct in two ways. They have a natural survival instinct, as you said earlier. When you don't have something to eat, you're much more apt to pick up a pitchfork and go to the political class behind their locked gates in Sri Lanka and say, you know what? You bastards did this to us. That's one. The other one's a financial survival instinct. I've worked my whole life. I've played by the rules. I've done everything right. I had X hundreds of thousands in the bank. I'm 65. And now that thing's only worth 30% of what it was a year ago. I need to do something about it. I need to buy some gold, whatever. So I think those two things are going to come as a synergy where you get a lot of social unrest and you got a lot of moves to, let's say, the most basic money of all time. But the globalists will not be able to control what they think they can. That's my point. And communities will start to get more in alignment with each other and look at each other and say, hey, how can we help each other survive or do better or make the best of what we have, or we've got a new invention or whatever. So I know it sounds doomy. I know it sounds gloomy, but it's a spiritual thing more than anything. And those that are high frequency, that resonate and vibrate, shows like yours, I mean, it's a high frequency show. This is a show for people that are looking for the truth and they want a solution, and the solution lies within yourself to be your best, and don't have too many expectations about the future or the past, but know that everything in the end is going to be okay. And we just have to get to the end. Before we get there, we've got a pretty big downstroke. We're going to have to hit bottom, and we will. And some will make it and some won't, but most will make it. And in that process, there will be a significant change on the people themselves revaluing what's valuable. As I said earlier, integrity, honesty, your word is your bond, be happier with what you have, and community, other humans. Stuff we've lost. I mean, we've gone as, and I don't know if this is true or not, but Einstein purportedly said he dreaded the day where our technology exceeded our humanity. And from my perspective, that's where we are. It's going to go back the other way. We're going to give up. I won't say give up, but we're going to mitigate the technology running in our lives. And we're going to go back to where, you're looking people in the eye and community really matters. Will that be global? Will it be everywhere? No. There'll probably be a bifurcation, like the most high-tech smart cities will probably be in line with what the globalists want, but it won't be as pervasive as they have outlined, where every human on the planet is under their control. It won't be that way.
David, as always, it's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I always enjoy your commentary and everything you do on social media. Been a big fan of yours for years, so thanks very much for hopping on here and chatting with us.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for the great question. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed this interview. Please let us know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Because when you do, it makes us want to make more content for you, the YouTube audience. All right. Thanks, everybody.